Hello and welcome back to the Starter Series. So for today's class, we're going to focus on a handful of standing poses. There's obviously a lot more than I'll cover in today's video, but these are some of your base poses to start with, and there's variations on those, and there's obviously more. So today's class, you might need a couple of blocks for one or two of the poses. You can always do it without blocks. I'll show you with and without. So we'll get started with a quote by Rachel Brathen. The yoga pose is not the goal. Becoming flexible is not the goal. Standing on your hands is not the goal. The goal is serenity, balance, truly finding peace in your own skin. That's the goal of yoga. So a lot of us come to the yoga practice for the poses, for the strengthening, for the flexibility, but a lot of us stay around for the deeper parts of yoga, which is, just as she said, the goal is serenity, balance, truly finding peace in your own skin. So you may not notice that right away, but as you do yoga more, you will start to see that it does go a little deeper than just the poses. So we're going to start in mountain pose, which is a very common pose that we come into in yoga. It's used in flow classes. It's a really good standing posture. It's a base posture we start in. And mountain pose is exactly what I'm doing right now. So what I'm doing is I have my feet are about 2 fist width apart, or roughly your hip width apart. Now, if you have really tight hamstrings, for some of the other poses that we add on from this one, you may actually have a wider stance. And sometimes you'll hear the teacher cue with your feet together. So with feet together, it is going to be a little bit more difficult on the hamstrings. I almost always start with a more wider stance, especially at the beginning of any class that I do, just because that helps me with my tight hamstrings. And I have perpetually tight hamstrings. That's just the way it is. So mountain pose is simply standing like a mountain. Your hands are down to your sides. So go ahead, if you want to try this with me, go ahead and stand up and come into mountain pose. So for a minute, go ahead and rock forward on your toes, then back on your heels, then to one side of your feet, and then to the other side. And now I'm going to pay attention to all 4 corners of your feet. I'll show you that real quick, all 4 corners. So the big toe mound, the little toe mound, and then the 2 points on your heel here. So those are your 4 points on your feet. Feel all of those equally contacting the ground. So the idea is to be steady and stable here, like a mountain. Hence the name mountain pose. Now obviously it doesn't look like a whole lot's going on here, especially if you're just someone walking by thinking, okay, the person's just standing there. But this is a base pose, and from this we do other things. So this is a go in to learn, go in to know, but really having that steady base. You can close your eyes, and you may notice with closing your eyes, it takes out that visual, so you might find yourself swaying a little bit. If your feet are closer together, you're going to probably find a little bit more challenge with balance there. So just try that one on for size, closing your eyes, breathing in and out through your nose, just for a couple of rounds there, before we'll move in to another standing posture. From here, we're going to come into low lunge. So this is where the blocks could come in handy. So I'm going to turn toward the front edge of my mat. Now I was turning sideways to show you mountain pose there, but a lot of times in yoga, you're going to be facing the front edge of your mat. So your yoga teacher might be facing sideways to show you the pose, but a lot of times you're going to be up at the top of your mat. So again, you would arrive in a mountain pose to go into this next pose, but I'm going to grab my blocks and I'm going to have them sitting next to my feet here just in case I need to use them. And you can have them on any setting. They can be a higher setting, medium, or even the lower setting. So the blocks here are tools to help raise the floor up to you. I once had a yoga teacher call them rectangles of hope, and I loved that term. So if you need a little bring the floor up to you, that's what they're there for. So we're going to arrive in mountain pose, because now we're going to step back into our low lunge. So arrive in your mountain. And then low lunge, we're going to lead the left foot forward. We're going to step that right leg back, hands down to blocks, and then go ahead and lower that back knee, untuck those back toes, and now you're in what's called low lunge. So there's a couple variations on this. Sometimes you'll be more upright coming into a low lunge. Sometimes you'll lean forward, hands either on the floor or on blocks. So you could have your fingertips on the ground. fingertips or hands on the blocks, or they could even be on your front knee. You can always back out of this some because you're going to really feel this in that hip flexor on the right there. So if you back out a bit more, you'll feel that more in your quads. But this is, in general, this is your low lunge pose here. So we're just going to stay here for just a moment to experience this before we do the other side. And then we're just going to step forward on our mat, come back into our mountain pose. So go ahead and rise back up. And we're in our mountain pose, and now we're going to step back with that left foot. So the right foot will stay forward, left foot back, hands down to blocks, drop that back knee, untuck those back toes. Your front leg, your right leg is bent. You can come out of it more upright if you like, or low lunge. You can also dip further in. And during a class, your yoga teacher will typically cue you as to what they're looking for that day. So it depends. If we were concentrating more on our quads, we'd be more upright. If we were more in the hip flexor area, we might come a little bit lower in. But you can always stay more upright. So you can always come out and back off as you need. This is the first time doing this pose. It might be intense. You might need to back out and do what you need to do. You can always bring those blocks with you and be more upright here. So there's so many options, but this is the base pose of low lunge. So go ahead and stay here for just a moment. Breathing in there before we step forward. And now we're going to come back to our mountain because now, so again, you can see that mountain is your base pose we return to for a lot of these. So it's a good one to know. And then from here, we're going to come into high lunge. So that one was low lunge, so our knee was down on the ground. Now our back knee is going to be off of the ground and we're going to be more upright. So we're going to start again. The left leg is going to stay forward. You're going to take that right leg back and we're going to stay more upright here. Now, this is where it comes, this is where you may need to adjust your stance. So the wider your feet are apart from each other, you could be as wide as your mat if you like, that's going to give you a more stable base. The closer they are toward each other, toward the center line, toward the midline, you're going to be a little bit more wobbly. So you're going to have to play with this. But my left leg is bent. My right leg is back and is straight, and you'll notice that my right heel is off of the ground. This is high lunge. So we're upright. A lot of times we add the arms, we might have those up overhead. They might be in different variations. I'm not going to focus on the arms today because that's going to change with the class. But this is your high lunge. And again, to make this more stable, widen out that stance. If you want to make it a little bit more challenging, you can bring your feet back closer into the midline. Maybe if you had like a line down the middle of your mat, the closer they are to that midline or that center line, the more wobbly you may find yourself. So here's high lunge. Go ahead and arrive in this pose for a moment. Don't worry about the arms. You can just leave them down your sides for today. Take a nice breath there, and then go ahead and step forward on your mat and come back into mountain pose. And then from mountain pose, we're going to go to the other side. So the right leg will stay forward. Step that left foot back. Adjust your stance however you need. So now my right leg is bent. My left leg is back and it's straight. And my left heel is off of the ground. And this is high lunge. My hips are squared toward the front of the mat in this pose. And again, hands and arms will be in different configurations depending on the class for that day. So we're going to leave those out for today, just to not confuse things more. You know, there's a lot of information, there's a lot to learn, but it really is a matter of just doing these poses and running through them and going through the class and listening to the teacher cue you through things, and it will become second nature. It really will. And then go ahead and step forward on your mat. And now I'm going to introduce Warrior 2 and then Warrior 1, and I'll explain why here in a moment. So there's actually 3 warriors, but we're only going to do the first 2 in this one. So Warrior 2, I'm going to start with since we've been doing our left forward, I'll do that. So I'm going to turn the other way just so I can face the camera. You don't have to do that. You can go ahead and step back with your right leg as we have been. But I'm going to turn just so I can face the camera. So I'm going to start over here on the other side instead. And I'm going to have my front left leg is going to be bent, and my toes will be toward the mat, or toward the front edge of the mat. And then I'm going to step this right foot back, and it will also be straight now. But now my toes are pointed; they're parallel to the edge of the edge of my mat here. So they're pointed toward the side of my mat. And my hips, the important distinction here between Warrior 1 and Warrior 2, and this is Warrior 2, your hips will be facing the side of your mat. So you're not going to be like we were in high lunge, we were facing, the hips were square to the front. Now they're square to the side edge of the mat. And the other important alignment point that may or may not, it doesn't work for every single person, is you're trying to have, if you were drawing a line from your front heel and would intersect your back arch of your foot. So that is just something to try to do. Don't get hung up on that exact alignment. But these are in line, as you can see. They're not staggered. And then the idea with Warrior 2 is you'll come deeper into that bend to really can intensify this. You can come out a bit. And then the arms get added. So the arms will come out to either side, straight out in front and straight out back. And then we typically would look over, in this case, since we got the left leg forward, we would look over the left hand. So this is Warrior 2. It is a very common pose. You'll see in a lot of yoga practices. And there'll be variations of this, different hand variations and arm variations, but this is the stance of Warrior 2. So stay there for a moment before we switch to the other side. Breathing in and out, and try not to hold your breath. It's really easy to hold your breath in these poses, especially the ones that require a little bit more effort. Try not to let your shoulders hike up. Try to keep them down the back there. And then go ahead and straighten that front leg for a minute. Let that go for a minute. Come back to your mountain pose, however you'd like. I'm just going to come to the center of my mat so I can face the camera, but you can always come back to the front of your mat. And then we'll go to the other side. So I'm just turning from one side of my mat to the other so I can face the camera. But if you were doing this all from the front edge of your mat, you would have just stepped back and then you'd step forward. And now we're going to step back again. And this time we'll leave the right foot forward and we'll step back the left foot. So the left foot's going to step back. The right leg is now bent in front of me. And my hips are now turned again to the side of the mat here. And as you can see, if I were to draw a line, roughly there would be a little from the arch to the heel. Again, don't get too hung up on that, but that gives you kind of an alignment cue to kind of focus for. And the other thing I need to mention, that I mentioned on the first side, is try not to let this knee splay out. You want to have this knee tracking over your toes here, your big toe, maybe that second toe. So you don't want to be splaying out or in, and it tends to do that. And that might just be something over time. If you have really tight, if you're tight at all in this the pelvic region, that may happen for a bit. You may have to work over time to get that to open up. And again, we're not doing any warm-ups for these. I'm just introducing the poses, so keep in mind you would do warm-ups for these to kind of help get you into these poses easier. This is just simply introducing these poses to you. So if you would like to try it out, go ahead and extend the arms out and look out now, out over that right hand. So here's your Warrior 2. Nice inhale and exhale there. The breath is really going to be your friend. And then release that. Step forward back on in front of your top of your mat. So now I'm going to go into Warrior 1. Warrior 1, you would think would be the easier of the two poses, and for a lot of students, Warrior 1 is sometimes harder for students, depending on their body. It's very similar though. So we're going to, same thing, we're going to step back with our right foot and leave the left foot forward. So my left foot is forward now. And you may need to adjust your stance here a bit. So it's still bent like Warrior 2 was. But now my hips are square to the front of the mat. And my back right foot is at about a 45-ish degree angle. It doesn't have to be exact. And my heel is on the ground. So high lunge was slightly different here because we did have our hips square to the front of the mat, but our heel was off. Now we have the heel on the ground. And this is what can make it a bit more challenging for some people. So you may need to shorten up your stance and your front knee may not bend as far. And this is Warrior 1. I don't want to get you confused. This is Warrior 1. And again, the arms can go up and there's a lot of different arm variations. We're going to leave the arms out of the equation for today. But when you're in this pose, you really want to, when you're on that back right foot, you want to try to put equal weight on the outer edge of your foot, not just the inner edge where the big toe is. You also want to have on your little toe. So you kind of, and that when you do that, when you kind of put more weight on that, you're going to feel that you'll feel that stretch. So again, trying to square the hips toward the front of the mat in this pose can be a little more difficult for some students. So Warrior 2 is typically a more accessible pose. But this is one that you will also see in a lot of yoga classes. So try this one out. Give yourself a couple breaths there. Just see how you feel. And the feet are also spaced out here, so they're not in alignment like they were in Warrior Two. And then step forward into your mountain pose, and we'll do the other side. So now I'm going to leave, excuse me, right leg forward. Now we're going to step that that left foot back. And I've got my right leg is bent. And now my left foot is at a 45-degree angle and it's straight. So again, it's similar to the high lunge, except now my heel is on the ground. But we're really trying to put equal weight on both sides of the foot, not leaning toward one side or the other. And then hips are square to the front of the mat. Warrior Two, we were to the side with the hips. Now we're facing the front of our mat. And you can always adjust your stance, or you can make this wider to make it more stable if needed, much like your high lunge. These poses, depending on the school, depending on the yoga school of thought, some have very strict alignment that you have to go with, and others is a bit more of what feels best in your body. So I'm I'm more in the camp of what feels best in your body. So go with what feels best. I'll give you cues that will protect you from getting hurt, but it's really more about what feels good for your body. So if you need to have a wider stance, go for that. And then step forward into your mountain pose. And then we're going to end there. There's a lot more standing poses, but I don't want to overwhelm you with this starter series. I want to give you some of the base ones that we use in a lot of classes, and then you'll hear new ones get added in, and you'll learn them, you'll see the pose, and you'll try it out. So it's a lot of trying it and see how it feels in your body. Thank you for joining me for this second class.